The crystal glasses chimed as Elizabeth Winters raised hers, her manicured fingers catching the candlelight in her immaculate Upper East Side dining room. "To my brilliant son, Thomas," she proclaimed, her voice carrying the effortless authority of old money, "for finally making full partner at Goldman Sachs." A chorus of polite applause followed. I remained silent, still in my wrinkled scrubs, having come straight from my night shift at Metropolitan Memorial Hospital. "I am Grace Chen, to my mother-in-law. I was merely the night nurse who had somehow ensnared her golden boy in marriage. What she didn't know was that by morning, I would be her boss." "Grace, dear," Elizabeth's voice dripped with artificial warmth, "couldn't you have at least changed before joining us? Scrubs hardly seem appropriate for a Winters family dinner." Beside me, Thomas stiffened. "Mom, Grace just finished an overnight ER shift. I think we can excuse her attire." Elizabeth laughed, a delicate, practiced sound. She cast a knowing glance at her country club friends. "Oh, Thomas, let's not be dramatic. She hands out aspirin and fluffs pillows. Let's not pretend she's holding lives in her hands. If she only knew." While working those so-called meaningless night shifts, I had orchestrated the largest hospital acquisition in New York's history. The healthcare empire I inherited from my grandfather had just completed a $2 billion takeover of the entire Metropolitan Hospital system, including the flagship hospital where Elizabeth reigned as chief of surgery. "Actually," I said evenly, "I assisted in an emergency thoracotomy tonight. The patient survived." Elizabeth waved a dismissive hand. "Anyone can assist. Leading a surgical department, now that takes real skill, not that you'd know anything about that." I thought of the reports waiting on my desk, the complaints about Elizabeth's leadership, the unexplained billing discrepancies, the declining success rates under her watch. All evidence I had carefully collected during my insignificant night shifts. "More wine, Grace?" Thomas's sister, Amanda, offered, her voice light, an attempt to defuse the tension. At least she had always been kind to me. "No, thank you," I said, setting my glass down. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." Elizabeth's eyes gleamed. "Oh, a seminar on proper bed-making techniques?" Soft laughter rippled around the table. Across from me, Thomas's father, Richard, shot his wife a warning look, though, true to form, he said nothing. "Something like that," I murmured. In truth, at 9 a.m., I'd be sitting at the head of a boardroom table, unveiling the new ownership of her beloved hospital. I had met Thomas 2 years ago when he came into the ER with a minor injury. Unlike his mother, he saw past titles, past social status. He fell in love with me, believing I was just a dedicated nurse paying off student loans. Like Elizabeth, he had no idea about my inheritance. "I still don't understand," Elizabeth continued, her tone sweet but her words sharp. "Why insist on working such dreadful night shifts? Thomas earns more than enough to support you, unless," her eyes narrowed slightly, "you're setting money aside for when things don't work out." "Mom," Thomas's voice carried a warning, but she was undeterred. "It's a valid concern, darling. The Winters family has standards, expectations, and frankly, a night nurse who can't even dress for dinner hardly meets them." I thought of my grandfather's words. "Watch how people treat those they believe are beneath them. It reveals everything." He had started as a hospital janitor while putting himself through medical school, before building an empire. "I just believe in earning my own way," I said calmly. Elizabeth scoffed. "Earning? Please, do you know what Thomas's bonus was this year? More than you'll make in a decade of changing bedpans." I did know, just as I knew Metropolitan Memorial's surgical department, under her leadership, had the highest mortality rate in the city, a fact carefully buried in public records, but glaringly obvious to anyone with access to the real data. Speaking of earning, Elizabeth turned to the table at large, voice lilting with amusement. "Did you know Grace refused to sign a prenup, probably hoping to claim half of Thomas's fortune when—" "That's enough, Mom," Thomas snapped, his voice cold. "Oh, if only she knew what was coming." "I chose not to have a prenup because I trust my wife," Thomas said, his voice firm, "and I'd appreciate it if you showed her some respect." Elizabeth's expression turned icy. "Respect? She's a night shift nurse who married above her station. The only thing I respect is my judgment in knowing this marriage won't last." Silence fell over the table. Even her sycophants shifted uncomfortably. I rose to my feet just as my pager buzzed, a perfectly timed excuse. "I'm needed at the hospital," I said smoothly, Thank you for dinner. Running away again? Elizabeth called, her voice saccharine. I suppose that's what happens when you know you don't belong. Thomas started to stand, but I rested a hand on his shoulder. Stay, I murmured. Finish dinner with your family, we'll talk later. As I walked out, I was already thinking about tomorrow's board meeting, the moment Elizabeth would finally understand who truly belonged in the world of medicine. My phone vibrated with a text from my lawyer. Everything's set for tomorrow. Board meets at 9 a.m. I smiled. Elizabeth Winters was about to learn a lesson she'd never forget. True power isn't about lineage or prestige, it's about competence, and she was about to lose hers. The next morning, I stepped into Metropolitan Memorial wearing a tailored Chanel suit instead of scrubs. The security guard did a double take. Morning, Joe, I greeted as always. How's Annie doing with her college applications? His face lit up. She got into nursing school, but tuitions, you know how it is. I nodded, thinking of the employee education fund I had already allocated as part of the hospital's transformation. Something tells me that's about to get a lot easier. The boardroom was on the top floor, overlooking Manhattan. Elizabeth was already there, sipping coffee, surrounded by allies. She barely spared me a glance as I walked in. I believe you're in the wrong place, she said with bored disdain. The nurse's station is on the second floor. Actually, I said, taking the seat at the head of the table, I'm exactly where I need to be. Before she could react, my lawyer walked in, followed by the board and several unfamiliar faces, executives from Chen Healthcare International. Elizabeth straightened. What is this? Who are these people? Board Chairman Stevens cleared his throat. If everyone could take their seats, we have some significant announcements. My lawyer set a thick folder in front of her. First, let me introduce the new owner of Metropolitan Memorial Hospital System, Dr. Grace Chen, CEO of Chen Healthcare International. The room went deathly silent. Elizabeth paled. This must be a joke. It's not, I replied, flipping open my portfolio. As of 9 a.m. this morning, Chen Healthcare owns the entire Metropolitan Hospital System, including this facility. But you're a nurse, she sputtered. I smiled. I'm also a licensed physician with an MBA from Harvard and a PhD in healthcare administration. The night shifts, those were part of my evaluation of hospital operations. My grandfather believed the best way to understand a healthcare system was from the ground up. I slid folders across the table. Inside, you'll find detailed reports on department performance over the past 2 years. I'd suggest starting with the surgical department. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she opened the folder. The evidence was all there. Her declining success rates, the favoritism, the fraudulent billing. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You can't just. Actually, I can, I said evenly, and I already have. I projected a chart onto the screen. Under your leadership, the surgical department's mortality rate has increased by 40%. Patient complaints have tripled. Junior staff turnover is at an all-time high. Those numbers aren't accurate. I met her gaze. I spent 2 years gathering data, Elizabeth, 2 years of night shifts, watching how this hospital really runs, 2 years documenting every cover-up, every unqualified hire you approved, every procedure you billed for but delegated to residents. Her allies sat frozen, their faces carefully neutral, some busied themselves with their phones. Chairman Stevens cleared his throat. Dr. Winters, these allegations are extremely serious. They're more than allegations, I said, holding up another file. The State Medical Board has already been notified, so has the Insurance Commission, and in about an hour, so will the press. Elizabeth opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I'd met her, she was speechless. And for the first time since I'd married into this family, she finally understood exactly who she had underestimated. Elizabeth shot to her feet so quickly that her chair crashed to the floor behind her. You planned this, she hissed. All those nights pretending to be some nobody, you were spying on us. No, Elizabeth, I said, my voice steady. I was doing exactly what you always mocked me for, changing bedpans, assisting in surgeries, caring for patients. I was just paying attention while I did it. I turned to the board, my gaze sweeping across the room. Metropolitan Memorial was once the best hospital in New York. My grandfather started his career here, as a janitor. He built an empire based on one belief, that healthcare should serve everyone, not just those with the right last name or social connections. The next hour was a storm of revelations and resignations. Elizabeth was suspended, pending investigation. Several of her allies, sensing the inevitable, stepped down before they could be forced out. By noon, the hospital's leadership had been completely restructured. But this was never about revenge. It was about transformation. Moving forward, I announced, we're implementing sweeping changes. Salary structures will be equalized across departments. Patient care metrics will be fully transparent, and every employee, from doctors to custodial staff, will have access to full education benefits. Through the boardroom's glass doors, I caught a glimpse of Joe, the security guard. He had worked here for years, always with a smile, always proud of his daughter's dream to become a nurse. I turned back to the board. And effective immediately, we're launching a $50 million employee education fund. A murmur rippled through the room. This was something new, something real. After the meeting, I found Elizabeth in her office, stuffing papers into a box. "Why?" she demanded, spinning to face me. "Why work as a nurse when you own the company?" "Because you don't fix a broken system from a corner office," I replied. "You fix it by understanding what it's like for the people doing the real work, not from charity galas, not from quarterly reports, from the ground up." Her hands clenched around the edge of her desk. "Does Thomas know?" she asked, quieter this time. "He does now." I turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway in his crisp Goldman Sachs suit, his expression unreadable. "The board chairman called me," Thomas said I should know what happened. "Thomas, darling," Elizabeth started, but he lifted a hand, cutting her off. 2 years, Mom, 2 years of you belittling my wife, mocking her, treating her like she wasn't worthy of this family, and all that time, she was working night shifts, not because she had to, but because she wanted to understand how to make this hospital better. I was trying to protect you," Elizabeth snapped. "No," Thomas said, his voice like steel, "you were proving exactly why she needed to do it, because people like you care more about power than patience, more about status than saving lives." Elizabeth said nothing. For the first time in her life, she had no defense. 6 months later, Metropolitan Memorial had been transformed. The mortality rate plummeted, staff satisfaction soared. The education fund had already helped 30 employees, including Joe's daughter, pursue advanced degrees. I still worked occasional night shifts, not because I had to, but because it reminded me of what mattered most: the patients, the nurses, the work that made a hospital a hospital. Elizabeth, now stripped of her title, still made appearances at medical conferences. She spoke about the dangers of corporate takeovers in healthcare, though the irony was lost on no one. Meanwhile, Metropolitan Memorial became a national model for healthcare reform. Thomas stood by my side, watching as I rebuilt his mother's crumbling kingdom into something far more valuable, a hospital where everyone mattered. And as for the winter's family dinners, we still attended, on occasion. But now, I wore my scrubs proudly. Because I had learned what Elizabeth never could. Power isn't in titles, it's not in family names. It's in what you do when no one is watching. And it's in who you choose to lift up, even when the world thinks you're just a night shift nurse.